Sorry, we got cut off. Hetty, that's really quite good, said Daisy. It's what they always say in my detective novels, said Mrs. Doherty. Any detail, no matter how small, may be important. Constant vigilance, chorused Hetty and Daisy, beaming at each other. When Mrs. Doherty mentioned small details, I remembered the teacup, the watch, and the piece of paper. These were the details that our whole case so far was based on, and this was our chance to find out more about at least one of them. The cup, I said to Daisy. Luckily, she understood me at once. What cup? Asked Mrs. Doherty. I took another bite of tart so that I would not have to answer. Hazel's worried about the things from the tea yesterday. She hates rats, Daisy said quickly. Is it really all still up in the dining room? You haven't tidied it up? At that moment, Chapman came into the kitchens with a tray of glasses that clinked against each other. He peered around at us as though he wanted to tell us off. What are you doing here, Miss Daisy? He asked. Nothing, said Daisy quickly. Only talking to Mrs. Doherty and Hetty about tea. The glasses on Chapman's tray jangled together like out-of-tune bells, and he backed away against a row of cupboards as though Daisy had just brandished a knife at him. That's quite enough of that, he said, as if Daisy had said murder instead of tea. Miss Daisy, take your friends out of these kitchens at once. Hetty and Mrs. Doherty have lunch to prepare, and I'm a very busy man. Now, Miss Daisy. Once again we had to leave, but we had plenty to think about. It seemed to me that we had been given one extra clue. Although we knew that Chapman could not actually have been responsible for Mr. Curtis's murder, the way he behaved when tea was mentioned made me think that he was worried about it. But why? Chapter 16. Out we went into the hall and stumbled onto another scene. Lady Hastings, in the same bright green dress and extravagant fur she had been wearing the day before, was standing in the middle of the worn hall carpet, and she was shouting at Uncle Felix. I'm in mourning, she wailed. Why can't anyone understand that? Oh, I have a heartless family. You should have heard Bertie just now telling me I should be pleased that Dennis is dead. Pleased? Don't exaggerate, Margaret, said Uncle Felix. You hardly knew him. Hardly knew him? Cried Lady Hastings. I'll have you know that he was my everything. Next to me, Daisy gasped. Her face had gone very pale. No, he wasn't, she shouted at her mother, her usual composure cracking. Daddy is. Why do you have to ruin everything? Daisy, said Lady Hastings, turning to face us. What are you doing here? Didn't I tell you to go and play? Miss Alston, Miss Alston! Really, Daisy, do get yourself under control, said Uncle Felix. We can't have everyone losing their heads. Daisy glared at him. I am under control, she said. Are you? This family! Lady Hastings threw up her hands theatrically and rushed away up the stairs. At that moment, Miss Alston stepped out of the music room. Of course, she must have heard her name being called, but seeing her still gave me a frightful shock. Daisy froze. Kitty gasped, and Beanie gave a small, frightened squeal. What a lot of noise, said Miss Alston. Whatever is going on? I stared at her shiny brown handbag and wondered how on earth we would ever get it away from her. My sister, making a scene, said Uncle Felix, and he gave Miss Alston a curious look. I struggled to work out what it was, and then I had it. It was the sort of look Daisy gave to me to tell me what she was thinking without using words. It was a look between friends, but as far as I knew, Uncle Felix and Miss Alston had never met before this weekend. Miss Alston, he said with another one of those curious looks, I think the girls are bored. We are not, said Daisy. We're perfectly all right. Kitty and Beanie were going to help Mrs. D set out the lunch things, and Hazel and I were about to take a quick walk in the garden. Weren't we, Hazel? Oh, I said, yes. But, Kitty began indignantly. It's spiffing of you to assist Mrs. D like that, said Daisy. Think of all the useful things you'll learn. Now, come along, Hazel. She clamped her fingers around my wrist and dragged me towards the front door. Although she looked as cool as anything, I could feel her trembling. I turned and looked back at Miss Alston and Uncle Felix and saw them still standing together, staring at us. This was suspicious behaviour indeed. They were all I could think about at that moment, but I knew that Daisy had no room in her head for anything but her mother. We hurried out through the heavy stone front doorway. It had stopped raining for a moment, but I shivered. What I wanted was some lunch. I was terribly jealous of Kitty and Beanie being able to help with it, but this was just between Daisy and me, like old times, and I knew I ought to appreciate it. Daisy wrinkled her nose and strode out onto the lawn without a pause. The ground was sopping and my shoes sank into the grass. I tried to go on tiptoe to save them, but it was no good. I soon gave up and slopped after her. "I hate Mummy," said Daisy after a while. "I know I oughtn't to, but I hate her. Being sad about Mr. Curtis, saying he was more important to her than Daddy. She's horrid. Oh, what a disappointment she is. Perhaps the murderer did do us a favour, getting rid of Mr. Curtis. Now perhaps she'll forget about him and everything can go back to the way it was." "But he is dead, Daisy," I said, stumbling on a particularly slippery hummock of grass. We passed the maze and went on outwards towards the flooded fields. Fallingford House on its little hill receding behind us. I wished it was so easy to leave it behind for good. "So?" asked Daisy. "Perhaps some people oughtn't to live." My fists clenched and I stopped. "Daisy," I said, "don't talk like that. You know it isn't true. Mr. Curtis was horrid and what he and your mother were doing was awful, but he didn't deserve to die because of it. You mustn't say so." "Well, someone thought he did," she replied. "What a horrible case this is. Everything's the wrong way round. The only really nasty person is dead. Just our luck, isn't it?" At that moment, a postage stamp window flashed open in the house behind us, and a little doll person stuck its head out and yelled. For one unpleasant moment, I thought something else terrible must have happened. But then I heard the words the little person, Kitty, was shouting. "Lunch!" she cried, very small and far away. "Come on in!" And she wiggled her matchstick arms like semaphore. My stomach gave a glad rumble. "Bother," said Daisy. "Meals, why do they keep coming round to interrupt us?" "All right, after lunch we'll have a proper Detective Society meeting to discuss what we have discovered this morning. We'll have it in the secret tree so that Bertie and Stephen can't come bothering us again. Are you in, Watson?" "Are Kitty and Beanie in?" I asked. The secret tree sounded like outside, and outside, I could feel perfectly well, was still wet. "Yes, they're in too," said Daisy, sighing, "if you insist, although they aren't really necessary. That is to say, they aren't you." "Oh," I said, suddenly feeling quite warm despite the chilly wind blowing through my cardigan. "Don't speak," said Daisy, "just shake on it." So we did the Detective Society handshake, and then we ran, squelchily, into lunch. See you tomorrow.